Welcome to Module 2, Synchronous Discussion Tools. In this module, we're going to specifically talk about how to use synchronous tools or live classrooms in your virtual K-12 education experiences, and then how you may want to use those particular synchronous tools in the most effective way, and how to avoid some of the pitfalls when trying to host live sessions. Now, synchronous discussions give you an opportunity to encourage very quick, on-the-fly collaboration, or it can be even in-depth collaboration, but it's a live collaboration. It would most clearly mimic a typical discussion in a classroom where students are debating something at the same time. Synchronous discussions help give your students a voice, and they can help students promote this idea of how do I assess something or think about something in a very quick fashion. So it's a way for you to get students to, as opposed to be very thoughtful about their discussions, but to be very quick and action-oriented and maybe even critical thinking, but in a quick fashion, in their debates or discussions or in applying concepts. It allows you to, as I mentioned before, replace a traditional live in the class discussion. And this becomes important, as we will give you some examples, because it allows you to do things like have in-class reviews. It allows you to get at what students may not understand in a little more robust way. And it can help you help students collaborate, particularly even in group projects, with one another in maybe a more meaningful way or a more informal, casual, yet connected way. Finally, synchronous discussions will also allow for you to have a big breadth of analysis that you might not be able to accomplish in any other tool, or get very specific in the analysis of something with your students that once again might be difficult in any other tool. Now, when you think about using synchronous discussions, it's important to think about using them in what I like to call a just-in-time teaching way. It's a way to get feedback or to give feedback in a quick, in-the-moment way, and it's a way for you to help change course as you're weaving through your particular virtual course. So if you notice that students are developing very beneficially in a certain way, but are still lacking a particular set of skills, you can use a synchronous discussion as a way to hone in on those particular skills that students are missing in a less planful fashion. Because many times when we're creating online courses, particularly for entirely virtual classes, we've created so much up front, it's hard to steer that ship. But a synchronous activity can help you steer that ship pretty quickly if you need to, in order to make sure students are getting the full range of learning and skills that you had intended. Now let's talk about some examples of synchronous sessions. First one is the brainstorming session. A live synchronous environment, so you have an hour where students are all together, can be a great place to brainstorm. If you wanted to brainstorm approaches to, let's say you have a history class, and you want to brainstorm approaches to winning World War II, and you wanted to debate, you want to have your students discuss or debate or to brainstorm what could have been some of the strategies that the generals put in place in order to win World War II. Well, so that's a great place to do that because students can quickly throw out ideas. They don't have to be super thoughtful in how they're articulating those, but it's more the idea in and of itself. Or perhaps you're having students participate in a community activity and you want them to brainstorm how would they actually run this perhaps community or local supported activity. How would they run it? What should they do? How would they market it? And so forth. Also a great thing to do in a brainstorming session to then get students going on that particular task or that activity, and then following up with that in a little more in depth. So brainstorming session is a great thing to do live in a synchronous environment. Similarly is an office hour session. And this is probably the one that most people are used to using live synchronous sessions for in virtual education. This is where students, you set up office hours and students can come and ask any questions they have live during a particular time period. The value to that is you can record these in most cases, and then students that didn't show up or showed up but didn't ask anything could still go back and listen to the answers to the questions that other students had. This is also a great way to prepare for exams or big assignments, or even perhaps lab sessions, guest speakers, or other event-oriented activities that may be part of your class. So office hour session, although most traditional probably in using a synchronous tool, is a great way to help make your students feel as though they can be supported at any time. A third one is the exam preparation session. And this one you don't even necessarily have to run. Just setting up time for students to be able to come in and discuss or debate ideas in preparation for an exam can be really critical. And in fact, in a number of classes that I've taught in the past, I've had students run these themselves. I will then ask them to record them. A lot of times I'll do these in groups where the group will come together and prep for the exam. I ask them to record the session so that I can go in later and take a look at the session and see what are they having difficulty with, and maybe also then help prepare them for the exam. Or it helps me get really good feedback on my own teaching and where students are struggling in learning concepts or skills or ideas. So the exam preparation session, also a great way to use a synchronous tool. Guest speaker sessions. I love these sessions. Now that we have online tools and we can have these synchronous sessions and they're robustly available, and I'll talk about providers in a second, a lot of them are free, you have access to experts around the world. And it's amazing the number of people that are more than happy to guest speak in a class if they don't have to fly there or drive there or get there, and they can do this outside of their normal work schedule. I've seen some very famous people speak in classes, really interesting people speak in classes virtually with students that they probably never would have been able to have access to otherwise. The great thing about a guest speaker session is you can couple this with an asynchronous discussion where you have students collect the questions that they want to ask the guest speaker, and then you can even give the guest speaker those questions ahead of time, and they can use those as the foundation of what they talk about. Or you can even have the guest speaker interact asynchronously before to get to know your students, and then once they're in the session, really create an engaging and an exciting session for students about whatever topic they're talking about. You also have the opportunity to have a group meeting session using synchronous discussions. Particularly if you're fully virtual with your students, it becomes important when you're doing group work, which I think we all do, that students have a good way of meeting with one another and collaborating around that good work. Well, in that group work, it can be hard, especially if you have lots of groups in your class, to be able to monitor what those groups are doing at all times. So once again, if you encourage your groups to meet, in fact, I do this in my current class that I teach, I'll have the groups meet and I'll come join them for the first 15 minutes of their synchronous session. I check in with how they're doing, I make sure they're okay, I make sure that they're on track, and then I check out and they finish their group sessions. It's a great way to get them to collaborate. It's a great way for me to see how are they collaborating, and it gives them a way to sort of replicate what a normal group activity would be in a physical classroom. And then finally, similarly with the group preparation or the group meeting session, you can have a group presentation session. And this is where groups present to one another their final results, their studies, whatever their final project is. And this is a great way to encourage students to not only be able to share their work with other students at a distance, particularly if you're fully virtual, but it also helps students practice presenting at a distance, which can be very important in their careers later on in their life. So a few quick tips for managing discussions, particularly synchronous discussions in this case. First, really think about how you're going to have students speak or talking procedures. It's important to say, do you want them to raise their hands? Many tools have that capability. Are they allowed to just free flow and just talk at any time? Or should students do you call on students? Do you rotate through students? But establish how you prefer. And I encourage you to stick with that because students will be a little uncomfortable at the beginning in managing these experiences or these synchronous sessions. But as they get used to your style and the class style, they'll get better and better at it. So just sort of determine how you want to have people talk, and then run a practice session where you exemplify how you want to have people talk or participate. Also, think about how you want to balance the talking and the texting. So in most synchronous tools, people can be talking, you can see them on camera, and then there's a separate text chat. And sometimes that can be overwhelming for teachers and for students. So setting some guidelines and showing that in the practice session will be important. So students are comfortable with how much do I talk versus how much do I chat? When will my question get answered? Will somebody see this? It gives the right kind of flow and process to that. And it's important to practice that. Also, I do encourage you to call in students because just like a physical classroom where some students will be more apt to participate than others, the same holds true in a synchronous environment. They may not be the same students, this has happened to me and I'm always surprised by this, but you will have students that feel at the outset more comfortable than others. So call on students and encourage everyone to participate and feel comfortable in this environment. Also, you want to be careful to limit your content. I usually say in a synchronous discussion, a good rule of thumb is have no more than 3 questions or 3 nuggets that you want students to either answer or walk away with. More than 3 is just too much. You get lost in it and you don't have enough time. It's gonna take more time to get through a topic synchronously than it would in a physical classroom, at least at the outset. So prepare for that and limit the kind of content, although you can still have breadth to your discussion, but just limit how much you're trying to accomplish. And make sure that you facilitate, but not dominate. It's important for students, and part of the reason why I bet you're having synchronous sessions is for them to have a voice. And if you use synchronous tools as just a lecture tool, there are a lot of other ways that you can deliver that content in the same or even more effective ways. I encourage you instead to just facilitate a conversation or a dialogue or an experience and not feel like you have to be the primary provider of content. And then last but not least, make sure that you assess what happens in that environment. I'm not saying necessarily give students a grade on how well they participated in this synchronous discussion, but make sure that the content in that discussion is important somewhere in your course. It's embedded in questions in your quizzes or your tests, it's part of an assignment or project that students have to complete, or it has value in their skill building that's associated with your course. Make sure it's more than just a way to have a conversation, but the content that is derived from that experience by students is of value in your course. I know that's a bit of a silly thing probably to say, but I see many of us still like to have these conversations that become chit-chatty or become, let's just talk about general ideas, and then students aren't as engaged or don't necessarily see the value because it's not affecting either their grades or their performance. Now, as I promised, I do have a couple of providers or tools that you can look into. There's a lot more than this, but these are the predominant tools of synchronous environments. You've got free things like Google Hangouts and Skype. I think those are probably the 2 most popular ones, Skype probably being the most popular, that teachers use all around the world. Really easy as long as you have an internet connection and you have a good mic and hopefully webcam if you're having people be showing their faces. If not, just a good mic is the most important thing. Now you can also use integrated tools within an LMS or a VLE environment, or even other tools out there will have embedded ways to synchronously interact. And then there are some free tools like Big Blue Button and Scribbler that are meant specifically for K-12 and higher education synchronous collaboration. Big Blue Button is an open source tool, so it requires the running of Big Blue Button. It's a little more technical. Scribbler is a cloud-based tool and that you can have students come in and ask questions and participate in these synchronous sessions. Scribbler is great. My math teachers that I've worked with tell me it's great because it does incorporate some good scientific notation. And then last, you've got some for-cost tools. Your district may have licenses to these, or you may have some budget for these. Most of these don't really have a free option, although I would keep in check to see if they do, because I see that technologies and technology companies all the time are releasing free versions of their stuff. But this is like a WizIQ, a Blackboard Collaborate, a WebEx, a GoToMeeting. Some of those are more appropriate for corporate environments and may not translate as well in K-12, but they're definitely worth a look depending on what kinds of capabilities you want to use in those synchronous discussions. So let's just take a moment to reflect on what we've just discussed. As a hypothetical, as we usually discuss, you're a world history teacher. And in this case, your students are high school students, ages 16 to 18, and they're working on a group presentation. And you want to have the group not only meet in synchronous sessions, but present their final projects in synchronous sessions. How might you structure that activity, and what obstacles might you run into in structuring that activity? So think about that as you're thinking about how synchronous activities and synchronous discussions would apply to your own teaching.